So a huge thank you to you all for coming, and for those of you who are giving presentations shortly, great thanks to you too for preparing some stuff for us. So my name is Elton Barker. I'm the principal investigator of Hestia and also the second phase of Hestia, HESTIA2. Just some admin stuff to begin with. We're being live streamed. The camera's there, but apparently I can walk. You can walk to about here and you're still going to be on the camera, which is good because I like to kind of wander up and down when I'm nervous, so that's okay. There's water here, so please don't get too dehydrated and collapse on us. If anyone's getting a little bit wobbly, stick up your hand and we'll see what we can do. But help yourself to the water. We've got 2 more coffee breaks during the day. I'll put up a programme shortly, but it should all be in your packs already, so you can see who's talking and when the next break is. And well, I think without further ado, I should get cracking, since try and keep to schedule as much as possible. I'm going to leave Tom after. So first of all, I'm going to give a brief background to where we're coming from, what the Hestia project was all about, and what this new phase of the project is going to try to achieve, part of which is what you're here for today, which is kind of public dissemination, knowledge exchange. And at the end of my presentation, I'll keep it to about 15-20 minutes. Tom will just say a few words about precisely what this seminar is all about, and then we get cracking with the presentations. So first of all, Hestia was a collaboration between myself, Chris Pelling, who's not actually omitted his name from this slide. He's a professor, Regis Professor of Greek at Oxford, Stefan Buzarowski, University of Birmingham, and Leif Isaacson, University of Southampton. And Stefan and Leif are my co-investigators on HESTIA2. Leif is not here because he's getting married in the States, and so it's kind of a good excuse, couldn't complain too much. Stefan, on the other hand, should be here, but Phil, who is his colleague in Birmingham, and who's the seminar leader of the Birmingham seminar, got a text from him earlier saying his car broke down in Bulgaria, and so he missed the flight to get him here this morning, so he's not coming, and he really has no excuse anyway. So Hestia is now, for me, for the purposes of today, is just me, but there'll be various Hestia team members dotted around who you'll get to meet shortly. So what was the Hestia project about? It was an AFG Arts and Humanities Research Council funded project starting in 2008 and ran for about 18 months. And is investigating histories of Herodotus. For those of you, and I'm aware that you're not all classicists, signed up classicists in the room. So Herodotus is a historian, Greek, writing about 430 BC, and he has a burning question. That's why his peoples, the Greeks, came into conflict with these other peoples, the Persians. So that's his kind of central question. And to answer this question, he goes about his world to describe how these two peoples came into conflict with each other. And I use this slide just to show that I do some research now and again. It's a slide just slavishly taken from Wikipedia, giving you a kind of mental map of Herodotus' world. In many ways, it's kind of interesting to get us to think about the different world that Herodotus inhabits. The water features are very important for Herodotus' world. You get a sense of these continents too, Europe, Libya and Asia. And people have generally talked about Herodotus' histories as the clash of cultures, a clash between East and West, Asia and Europe. And we still think in these binary terms today. For us, we wanted to challenge that paradigm, and in particular we wanted to introduce 2 key aspects into this kind of map. And one way in which we were going to do this is using digital resources. For us, there are 2 key problems with this map. First of all, it gives you a static image in space. So this is kind of a snapshot of Herodotus, of how Herodotus represents space. But Herodotus writes a narrative. And so for us, this is, I think, a really interesting way into thinking or rethinking about spatial modelling and geographical concepts. We're so used to thinking in terms of cartographical imageries, maps like this that just give you a one-time image, whereas the potential for extracting spatial data from a text and seeing how space moves through time was very attractive for us and counter to this cartographic model that we tend to have in our heads. So that's one aspect, the time issue. And secondly, the space issue. Again, this gives you just a kind of static image. There's no movement in this space. You get continents, Europe, Asia, Libya, water features here as boundaries. To a certain extent, that's in Herodotus, but he also confronts, and explicitly as a narrator, confronts these models and challenges them. And one thing that we were interested in doing was going beyond space as points on a map and think about space as lived experiences, space as moving through time and also space. And Herodotus talks about, this is the only bit of Greek you get, so it's just kind of warning. This comes at the end of his prologue, and he talks about how he's going to go through in detail towns of men, both small and great alike. For of the places that were once great, most have now become small, while those that were great in my time were small before. So he's very well aware, embedded within his concept of space is this concept of time, and how space moves through time. So we were interested in capturing this, and we had two methods. First of all, with Stefan's expertise from a geographical perspective and thinking about space in terms of relationships, networks, and I'll show you some slides in a minute about that, and that very much feeds into what this seminar is all about. And secondly, using Leif's expertise, trying to use as much as possible digital resources to give us a helping hand with some of our analyses. And we started off with the digital text itself. We thought we were going to have to, let's say, encode or mark up the text ourselves. We were crazy to think this, and even crazier, the AHRC thought that we could do this within the short time period. Fortunately, and this is one lesson I want to try and communicate, there's a lot of stuff already out there. So for us, we found that there was this fantastic classical library online where the texts are not only free to use but also to reuse. That's absolutely critical. And so I learnt that if you click this orange button here, XML, and remember I'm a classicist, so I didn't have any idea what this meant or what clicking this warning button was going to provide us with. It brought up this. So this is a text and encoded initiative marked up text, and the only bit of information I want to draw your attention to here is that place names, toponyms are marked up. So the first place there, Halicarnassus, that's where Herodotus is from. So we got this text from Perseus, we went through it, we cleaned it up because this, the encoding had been semi-automated. And of course, once you've extracted that kind of spatial data, toponyms, I want to come back to the issue of spatial data shortly, but once you've, of course, extracted the spatial data, then you've got a database. I guess two things of interest I want to draw your attention to here. First of all, you've got coordinates. So once you've got coordinates, you can then start mapping things, and that, of course, gives you a lot of potential. It's a very powerful tool to be able to map and to visualize the places. And secondly, we gave each mention of a place a unique identifier. So Halicarnassus gets a unique identifier 1, because that's the first place it's mentioned. When it gets mentioned again, it gets another unique identifier. So this means we start building time into the concept of place. So we can start counting the number of times a place gets mentioned, where it gets mentioned in the narrative. Okay, that's kind of all the boring stuff. Now we get to the mapping. And so this is all the place names in Herodotus in GIS. We've color coordinated it, so the red dots are settlements, the blue dots are territories, and the yellow dots are, the blue dots are natural features, the yellow dots are territories. And there are two things I want to say about this, actually three things I guess. First of all, it gives you a useful snapshot image of places in Herodotus. Secondly, we found it really useful for data cleaning, because once we stuck all the places on a GIS map like this, we discovered that there are some outlying places in North Scotland, and we were pretty sure that Herodotus or any of his sources hadn't visited the north of Scotland, so that was telling us something about the problem with our data. So one way in which you can use visualization is actually to clean your data. And thirdly, of course, there are problems, inherent problems with this kind of map. Just thinking in terms of dots. A dot for a territory, for a settlement it's okay. For a territory, which is much larger, problematic. Even more problematic, of course, when you're dealing with natural features, like a sea or river. Where do you put the dot? So this kind of map is also insufficient. And of course it just gives you a snapshot. It's exactly the kind of dots on a map that we're trying to move away from in the Hestia project. Well, of course, we can make it a little bit more sophisticated. So this is now weighting the times a place is mentioned in history, so that the larger the circle, the more time a place is mentioned. So it starts building into our visualization a sense of time and a sense of narrative, but we're still stuck on the dots, as it were. And there's also the issue too of using GIS, and as a let's say, social scientist, I found GIS quite a difficult tool set to start using by myself, and I was having to ring Leaf up every 10 minutes. When you did that query, exactly how did that work? So there's an issue there with the technology. So we're also experimenting with other ways, other technologies that are perhaps a little bit more intuitive. One of which is Google Earth. So that we've provided that data that you saw before, the spatial data, as a KML link. So you can just click on that and your version of Google Earth opens up with Herodotus now embedded within it. So you can start looking at places. This is Pontus, Black Sea. All the kind of the porcupine image you see all the times Herodotus mentions the Black Sea. And you can click on any of these points and see what Herodotus has to say about it. Quite useful perhaps as a teaching tool, but again it kind of gets you away from the narrative. In fact, it just privileges place. And like I said before, we wanted to really think about the narrative. So we developed, and this was in collaboration with a JavaScript developer called Nick Rabinovitz, this kind of visualization. You're going to see a more updated version of this in a minute, where you've got the text in one panel, a kind of Google Maps interface, and the timeline, or perhaps better, a book line underneath. And as you read through the text, the places mentioned in the text appear on the map. So that's getting you now to start thinking in terms of reading text and space together, getting a sense of how places come in and out of focus in the histories. But we're still dots on a map, and like I said, we're trying to get away from that. And today's seminar, if it's about anything, it's about network analysis. Now this slide is the one that Stefan ought to be explaining, because I don't understand his fancy little equation there, because he's the geographer. But basically what we did, as well as conducting this digital examination, we also read through one section of the text very, very carefully. Herodotus' Histories is made up of 9 books. We chose the middle book, book 5, and we read every single sentence and looking for spatial data. That was the first thing. So first of all, identifying if there are any spatial data in the sentence, and secondly, if there's more than one spatial datum in the sentence, then connecting them. There's some kind of relationship that the author or one of his historical agents is drawing in the narrative. The 2 things I want to emphasize here. First of all, as soon as we started reading the text ourselves and not relying upon the digital spatial extraction, we noticed there's a lot of spatial stuff there that we hadn't captured. Primarily the idea of proxies. So this is the first thing we did, was to extend the idea of place or space from just a place name to the idea of people who inhabit these places as representative of these places. Just to give you one quite simple example, one of the Persian kings in Herodotus' narrative is Darius. Herodotus will say something typically like Darius was in Scythia. Now he doesn't want us to imagine that Darius is on holiday in Scythia by himself. What we're meant to imagine there is Darius and his whole great Persian army are in Scythia as an occupying force. So that meant that behind, not all instances of the word Darius, but behind a lot of instances of the word Darius, which is a pronoun, not a toponym, was an important spatial idea. So we extended our analysis to incorporate ethnica, both individuals and also peoples who can be representative of a place. That's the first thing we did. And secondly, thinking in terms of relationships, we had the idea of 2 key geographic principles. Was there movement or no movement? Was some kind of transformation taking place? So does place or proxy A transform place or proxy B in some way? So that's one way in thinking in terms of extracting structure, spatial structure from text in terms of a kind of network analysis. And what we ended up with was something like this. that Irad Malkin has called a spaghetti monster, not referring to ours, but just generally in terms of network pictures that give you too much information, impossible to read. And so that again raises an issue of how you present your data and what kind of analysis you are then bringing to it. Because these visualizations they are in some ways the end product of investigation and of interpretation, us reading the text carefully, but they're also then the beginning of another stage of interpretation. So they're not there as just a product, this is kind of proof of something. You then have to interpret, so that means you have to visualize this data in a way that you can make sense of. So with the help of a guy called Scott Weingart, who's at Indiana University, we managed to clean up our visualization so we can start making sense of it in some way. And of course you can then introduce the categories that we were thinking about before, in terms of this is category 1, so the lowest level, there's no movement, there's no transformation taking place. Typically this is when Herodotus as a narrator is describing one place in relationship to another place as a kind of comparison, for example. And then this is the highest level. So when Herodotus is describing one place in movement to another place and also affecting some kind of transformation on that end place. And this is from a Herodotus perspective was interesting because you see clusters emerging, clusters around Persia, clusters around certain Greek city-states. That took a long time. That was a year of analysis to go through the one section of the text. So we also wanted to experiment, since we had a digital text, could we find ways of making quick and dirty networks, giving us a sense of these network relationships in the text. And that's something that we're still very much engaged with. This is an early version, again in GIS, and this is one of those complex queries that I, for one, really struggled with, and that Leaf really had to help me out. But already this kind of very basic network was kind of useful. So what you're seeing here are a network based on territories, so kind of higher category place. And the thicker the red line and the darker the red, I think he has to pull it, yeah. Come in, Humphrey. The thicker the red line, the darker the red, the stronger the relationship. And just to explain what's going on here, when we kind of played around with this network, we would have expected Greece to be at the centre, because Herodotus is Greek, he's writing in Greek for a Greek audience, so we thought that Greece would be the centre of this territory network, and instead it was Egypt, which initially struck us as a surprise, but then upon reflection it made sense, because for the whole of one book, Herodotus Book 2, Herodotus talks about Egypt, and not just talking about Egypt by itself, but always in comparison to other places, whether that's Persia or whether it's about Greece. So again, the point here is that first of all, this is a very quick and dirty network, so you'd have to really drill down into the text yourself to understand what's going on. So again, it's in terms of provoking a response and getting you to think. Yeah? 3 minutes, that's fine. I think I'm on schedule. But it's a way of trying to use digital resources in a way that can benefit our kind of analysis. So this brings us on to HESTIA2, where we're at now. And it very much is trying to communicate some of the methodologies, less so the outcomes actually, I think, and how we can then use those further in other texts in academia, but also to start reaching out in a broader community and also learn about what you guys are doing. So this is a follow-on funding project from the HRC. It's running for 1 year, just started. This is the first event. There are 2 key work packages. One is development, and one thing we're going to do, and there's some of the development team are here, so there's Kate Byrne, who you'll be hearing from later. One of the key things we're going to be doing is to import the Hestia data that we have into this new visualization. So you saw before a kind of a rudimentary time map. This is, if you like, a time map with now bells and whistles on. This is again in collaboration with Nick Rabinovitz. This is on another project, a Google Ancient Places project. What you see here is fully automated. That's why you've got locations in Scotland. That hasn't been corrected, but this is fully automated using Google Books corpus. but some new visualizations. So this is a snapshot with a number of times the places mentioned on the right hand side. This is a reading image you saw before, so you read through the text, the places appear in one of the reading panes, and then you've got the timeline underneath. And then you've got something that I'm particularly interested in, that's again this network idea. So this is places that are mentioned most often in relationship to, let me think, Athens. So those places mentioned most often in the narrative next to Athens, and constructing a network picture. And there's just one other thing I want to draw your attention to. In one of the columns on the left-hand side, there's a link to what's called the Pelagios Graph Explorer, which is a whole different project. But the one thing I want to say about that is it's a linked open data project. And so that means once you start, this means you can start connecting different kinds of online documents that reference ancient places. So that I'm looking at text here, looking at a place in a text, but I want to get information about maybe the archaeological reports or other kinds of data relating to this place, and Pelagios, this network, allows you to be able to extract that kind of information. So the seminars, of which this is a first, are taking different aspects, interrelated of course, but different aspects of the Hestia project. So the Southampton seminar, today's seminar, is about network analysis models. We'll then be going to Stanford, thinking about how you can make sense of the messy data that humanities texts often give you. Birmingham will be focusing more on the role of GIS in mapping text, and finally the Open University will be looking at kind of user response and user engagement with the resulting visualizations. And you have the team here, and I think I'll leave Tom to, is the program of today, and leave Tom just to talk about, to set up this seminar and the themes. And if you have any questions about Hestia or HESTIA2, grab me in the break. But really, today is about us learning what you guys are up to and whether there's, you know, kind of potential crossover.
Yeah, actually, that is just what I wanted to say, so I actually don't have to say anything, really. And Elton gave a good introduction of what Hestia is about, and really what lies at the core of Hestia, and in particular this meeting today, is that we have a genuine interest in past conceptions of space, but that we think that new techniques and technologies have the potential to enhance our understanding of past conceptions of space. But not just by allowing us to do what we already did in the last decades, much faster, much efficiently, dealing with larger data sets. That's useful, definitely. But we also believe that techniques such as network analysis or linked data allows us to address new questions. It allows us to confront our data in a completely new way and maybe extract different kind of ideas. Maybe this could lead to new hypotheses. So what this particular meeting is all about is trying to get people from different backgrounds that have an experience in classics or dealing with material data in archaeology, maybe in a commercial archaeology context, or people with a technical background with an interest in network analysis, spatial data exploration and analysis, and linked data analysis. Trying to get all those people together and address a couple of questions, like really think about and discuss how we could use these new technologies to think about past conceptions of space in a new way. What are the advantages and the disadvantages? So I'll quickly read these out for you, then you can keep these in mind all through the entire thing. We've got 3 discussion sections at the end of each session. So, how can linked data techniques be used in the commercial, administrative and academic sectors? How can it enhance collaboration and sharing of data across different sectors? What are the advantages and disadvantages of doing so? How are the concepts of space represented in linked data techniques? And how can linked data enhance the study of past conceptions of space? That's all linked data stuff. Now let's talk about network stuff. How can network-based, and obviously there's some interesting crossovers which I think we will see in a lot of the presentations here. So I'm particularly interested personally actually in how you kind of formalize stuff in a model in linked data, and then how can you link that in with network analysis techniques to explore that in a new way? Does it really add something, or is it just kind of an exploration of your model? How can network-based techniques enhance the study of large and heterogeneous data sets? And with heterogeneous, I mainly mean in this context data sets, material data sets that we deal with in archaeology, for example, or the records that describe that material data set. And then we have written sources that people in classics or in history deal with, for example. How can we combine all of that information and say something sensible about those things, addressing the same research questions? What are the advantages of a network's research perspective, and how can spatial and non-spatial network techniques be used to explore past conceptions of space? Now, think about that. Now I'm going to do something really important. I'm going to take a bottle of water and I'm going to drink from it. It's extremely hot. We're not used to this in the UK, right? And I really don't want anyone to faint, because that's a health and safety hazard, which we also care a lot about in the UK. So I'm also obliged to tell you that there's 4 emergency exits, 2 in the front and 2 at the back. And that's all for the airplane analogy. I'll also look into whether we can do something with the air conditioning or something, and whether that person that's drilling there can shut up. Then there's one more householding task. One of our speakers sadly can't make it today, Terry Nur-Miko, because she fell ill earlier this week. We found someone to replace her, Nicole Beale, but sadly this morning there was a sad case within the family, so she couldn't jump in for her. So what we will do now is we'll make sure that the break at 1:30, I think it is, will just be extended by 25 minutes, which gives you the chance to have some lunch and enjoy the coffee there a bit more. We've generously catered, so you can drink loads of coffee. And then we'll just kind of start with the second presentation of that section. Terry's presentation will be made available online afterwards, as will most of the presentations. Okay, now I'll just hand over to Keith to chair the first section.
Okay.